If you're wondering what the easiest, most efficient, but low impact way to work on your hip mobility is, you've come to the right place. Out of the 200 to 300 people I teach in person every single week, almost all of them struggle with hip mobility the most. It is such a common problem. Probably half the people who have subscribed to this channel came for mobility and specifically hip mobility work. So today I'm going to share with you a very short routine that can help you advance your hip mobility with very easy to access exercises in a much more effective way. So if you're ready, let's go and have some fun. Now, just to make this a little bit easier than it already is for you, if you have a yoga block or a book to lean on, if your range of motion is very short, it would help you make it even more accessible. And the best thing about these exercises is that they not only just work on your hip flexors and your hip extensors, but they also include your spinal mobility, which is very important when it comes to overall hip mobility and can impede your range of motion if you do not take care of that as well. Not to mention that all the pains and aches and injuries we can have if we lack the necessary mobility, not only in your hips, but surrounding them. Start out in a seated position. Make sure that your legs are a little bit wider than shoulder width apart. We need space for our hips to be able to push them down towards the ground. Even if you do not have the necessary range of motion yet, over time you will develop it. And all you want to do from here, and that is very important, to learn to tilt your pelvis into an anterior and posterior tilt. Out of this position, all we want to do is round our lumbar spine, pushing our hips forward, pulling in our stomach and pushing our butt down towards the ground, which is going to lengthen our posterior chain and flex our anterior chain. And then we're going to do the reverse, flexing our posterior chain, our spinal erectors, reverse that pelvic tilt. One of the major movements your hips are responsible for, and one of the movements that most people struggle with due to their lack of ability of contracting these muscles. Switch it up a handful of times, warm up a little bit, and we can move on to the next exercise. Switching to our second exercise is as easy as switching into a quadruped position, going into spinal extension, flexing our spinal erectors, once again lengthening our anterior chain, surrounding our hip flexors and our lower abdominals, and then with anterior shoulder rotation, we're going into complete spinal flexion. Pull your stomach in, lengthen your entire posterior chain, which means that you're gonna have to flex your entire anterior chain, giving you over time longer range of motion and more control over your pelvic tilt. Now, once you've gone through a handful of repetitions of these, now you can go into the actual workout. We're going to switch our quadruped position like so, pointing our hands forward, and then we're gonna step forward with one of our feet, place them at the same height. In this position, we already have a nice stretch surrounding our glutes and our hamstrings, which is in turn going to help us loosen up our hip joint. We also have stretch in our adductors, especially once we start pushing our knee outwards. And now comes a really important part. You're going to push your hips down. Once again, try to push your back into spinal extension, which is going to lengthen your quadriceps and your hip flexors, stretching out your anterior chain on this side and stretching out your posterior chain on that side. And from here, we're going to switch into spinal flexion once more, pushing our hips back to release all the stretch we had in our anterior chain, move it to our posterior chain in the extended leg. And now once again, we have that stretch surrounding our spinal erectors, which are intrinsically connected to our hip mobility. In the dynamic move, it looks a little bit like this. Push back into flexion, push forward into extension, and switch between that anterior and posterior pelvic tilt. Now, we don't even have to switch positions to go into the next exercise. We're going to add some lumbar rotation, meaning we're going to switch between elevating one arm towards the ceiling, which is going to lengthen our spinal erectors even more, lengthen our obliques, and help us lengthen our quadriceps and our hip flexors as well. Not to mention that through this rotation, we're actively pushing the other leg outwards, increasing our stretch surrounding our glutes and the outside of our quads. And then we're gonna, of course, switch it up dynamically. Right hand down, left arm up. This is going to release some of the tension you had on one side while helping you open up the other side. So now that we've added not only spinal extension and flexion, but also spinal rotation and even some lateral flexion due to our obliques being flexed on this side, we have basically also added complete lumbar spinal mobility, which is one of the things most people neglect working on, and one of the things that lead to a lot of pain and a lot of heartache you could very well avoid. And this is where our blog or our book will come in very handy. We have now released a lot of tension surrounding our hip joints and our spine, which means that we can from here lower down even further. So if you do have the range of motion, you're going to place your lower arms here and just relax into this position and hold a static stretch. If you can't, you will take that elevation and lower like so. Over time, you will reduce it like so and like so until you have the necessary flexibility to relax in this position. And you will of course notice that now we have increased the stretch on our front leg even more. Basically every single tendon ligament will open up all the way. And this is our very first static stretch, which we will hold for 30 seconds. Just relax into this position. Take a couple of deep breaths. The more you can relax, the more effective this will be. So try to avoid flexing any of your musculature and maybe take a short nap here. This moves us to our next static stretch, and it is really hard to talk about effective hip mobility, especially low impact, without talking about the pigeon pose, for good reason, because it is very effective at opening up your hips, specifically your glutes outside of your quads and a little bit on your adductors as well. And once again, here we can use that block if you do not have the necessary mobility to go into external rotation until your leg is all the way down on the floor. Start pushing your knee outwards and hold it in this position. Over time, once again, you can increase the stretch by reducing the elevation until you have the necessary flexibility surrounding your hip joint to remove this and get here all the way. Because from here, we can do a lot of things that will help us advance our hip mobility without having to switch our starting position. So you're gonna hold this 30 seconds, and then we're gonna move on to the next exercise. And if you've paid attention, you know what we're gonna do from here. We will push our hips down, go into spinal extension, and now you notice how important it is to have control over your pelvic tilt to maximize the amount of stretch and to maximize the amount of mobility you can get from your general hip mobility exercises. Push down and then release into lumbar flexion and repeat, going through this dynamic movement a handful of times, lengthening our glutes on the outside, lengthening our hip flexors and our quads on the other leg, while, and that is very important, strengthening the muscles that are responsible for moving our hips into complete extension, meaning our spinal erectors and our glutes as well as our hamstrings. And once again, maximizing our stretchability in this position, we will try to lower down first on our elbows until we can lower down all the way face to the ground while pushing our hips towards the floor actively. Lower down right here, lower down right here, lower down right here, and then you're on the floor. And over time, extend your arms, extendy, 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 and take a short nap here. 30 seconds, more than enough. You can take a short break in between, releasing all that stretch, and then go for the next one. So now that we have stretched basically every single muscle surrounding our hips, so everything from our knees all the way to our rib cage is basically all loosey-goosey, we can move on to two very important things we have yet to work on, and then we're done for today. Once again, if you have a very bad mobility, then you will need some sort of elevation, or even more effective, something slanted like that. Because our new starting position will be in a deep squat. Now, if you elevate your heels, even if you have very bad mobility in those lower body joints, you will still be able to lower down into a complete deep squat or resting squat. And all we will do from here is work on our internal hip rotation, bringing one knee right in front of the other foot, all the way down to the floor, reversing that movement and repeating on the other side, working dynamically. Over time, once you have the necessary mobility and the necessary core and hip flexor strength, you can remove those elevations and start working with your feet flat on the ground. Internal hip rotation on one side and internal hip rotation on the other side. Before you move on to the next dynamic exercise, we have a static one in between. You're going to try to pull your shoulders in as much as you can. Once again, if your range of motion ends here, don't worry about it. This is why we're here. You're going to start opening up your arms sideways and push your knees backwards. which is in turn going to open up your entire inner hip musculature and all the way surrounding your hip joint towards your glutes. Hold that one for 30 seconds, and now we can move on to the next one. Since we've worked on internal rotation, we're now gonna push our knee outwards, which is going to force our hip into external rotation, drive our knee towards the floor. If you are lacking the necessary strength or flexibility to do this, you can place your hands on the ground, move like so, and all we need to do from here is activate our posterior chain to push our hips forward, extending our hip and lengthening our entire anterior chain while working on this external hip rotation on both joints. Knee outwards on the right side, knee outwards on the left, before you reverse, rolling over our toes, adding a little bit of ankle mobility as another bonus, and pushing the other knee outwards and pushing our hip forward, double external hip rotation, reverse, and repeat. You can go through it dynamically, and I would also suggest you hold the most stretchy position for you, if that is all the way in the front here, for 30 seconds, if that is all the way in the back here, for 30 seconds. Now, this last exercise I'm adding as a bonus. It is a little bit more advanced. However, it also is one of the most, and I literally mean the most effective hip mobility exercises you will ever do. Try and work on it a little bit and see how far you get. Because our starting position is going to be the exact same, and now we're going to work on our internal rotation and our external rotation simultaneously, not only through going through those movements, but also through requiring a lot of strength and a lot of control to reverse this without the support of our hands. And of course, if you do not have the necessary control yet, work with your hands on the ground. Elevate your leg, reverse into the deep squat, internal rotation on one side and external rotation on the other side. Of course, into the other direction as well. If you do have the strength and control, go through it like so. And if you have more flexibility, or if you want to add more stretching, then you will do the exact same thing. Add as much spinal rotation as you can towards the side. And now you're going to start lowering your upper body, lower, lower, and lower. This in turn will help us lengthen those muscles much more by adding all of this rotation and that push forward. Hold it for 30 seconds and repeat into the other direction. Internal, external hip rotation, switch all the way down, hold for 30 seconds and go through this a handful of times. Now, I am not exaggerating when I tell you that this routine is absurdly, I really mean absurdly effective on working on your hip mobility. Trust me, your advancement will be so fast, you will be absolutely amazed at how easy it is to actually work on your hip mobility once you know what to do. Try to work your way up to a full minute for each one of those dynamic exercises. Hold every static stretch for 30 seconds, do one full round, and if you feel like it, and if you have the necessary time, go for a second round. However, I would highly suggest you increase the frequency, meaning you do it 5 to 6 times a week, and just 10 minutes, much more effective than just doing it once a week for 30 minutes or for 20 minutes. The speed with which you can advance and the amount of relief you will get from those is absolutely incredible. And if you like the video, and come on, join us. We do stuff like that pretty much every single day, which means that I will see you tomorrow. So until then, Captain Cairo, peace out.